Hello, and welcome back to Beating a Dead Horse. As always, I'm your host, Sean McKinda.
And I'm your host, Jackson Keller.
And this week, it's special, because you know what? It's time for another guest episode. We're bringing on new people all over the place, trying to see what new movies they have to offer us, because you know what? Most of these movies we never watch. We watch science fiction movies and dumb anime things and other bad stuff.
Well, this is a historical moment for Beating a Dead Horse, because this is our first episode with a guest, where the guest was not made to fill my absence for being a derelict fuck.
Yeah, so we're all here. It's me, Jackson, and our guest, Maddie.
Hi.
That's Maddie. She has picked our movie this week, which is the 2010 remake of True Grit, a movie that I understand she chose for some reasons.
So I chose this movie because I grew up watching the old original made in the 60s with my grandfather, and it really resonated with me as a stereotypical amazing Western because it stars a 14-year-old girl also named Maddie.
Oh, so this is a whole ego trip thing going on here then, is what we're saying.
No, but for real, I really like the remake. I think Jeff Bridges did a great job in John Wayne's absence. I think the introduction of Haley Steinfeld was a great moment for her to start this whole journey of filmmaking, and I just thought it was an interesting film, and I know you guys don't do a lot of Westerns, so I thought it might be interesting to kind of mix up the cards a little.
I mean, if by a lot you mean any, because this is the first one we've ever done, so...
Well, there you go. Perfect.
I gotta say, I'm really glad that you suggested that we talk about this movie, because I saw it when it came out in theaters when I was like 15, and I really didn't like it. I didn't understand why everyone thought it was so good. And so, thinking upon that initial reaction over the years, this is a movie that I had still thought about. And I was wondering, I wonder what everyone did see that I didn't. But I probably wouldn't have ever gone back without this sort of suggestion. So now that we have, and I've watched it again, it is great. Everyone on Team True Grit 2010 was great, was right all along, and 15-year-old Jackson was a foolish boy, not that we needed any more evidence for that. So that's my piece on True Grit.
Yeah, and I have not seen any of the True Grits whatsoever. I think this is like my third Western I've ever watched, so I'm very new to the genre as well as the movie itself.
Well, welcome. Quite exciting times.
Quite exciting times of 2010. High school, yeah!
Exactly.
Let's
nostalgia.
Not talk about that ever, please.
But I think this movie exists in an interesting aspect of a Western because it focuses on a woman as a heroine in this film, especially as a 14-year-old girl avenging her father's death. So most Westerns have a clear bad guy and a clear good guy, and I think this kind of plays on both the sides of what is good, what is bad, how the West was won or how it was lost. So that's kind of why I gravitated towards more controversial Western film for you guys.
Ooh.
I know.
Getting spicy right from the get-go. I like it. Yeah, no, it's definitely kind of a cool, unconventional Western. At least, I should say, I've seen The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, and the Magnificent Seven remake, and that's it. And both of those are pretty clear-cut and dry. I mean, one's straight up called The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly.
It's very important to Western culture, so that's because you watched it.
Yeah, I've at least seen, some of the big ones. And by some, I mean one.
My main interaction with Westerns before this, was that I was in the drama club in high school, and I had to play a cowboy as the lead, and I had to be like a charming, suave, John Wayne type, except I clearly wasn't that at all. And the directors, did my sister direct that play? I think she did.
No.
So she was really mad at me because I was doing a really bad job, because I was just this awkward little nerd boy trying to play John Wayne, and it was embarrassing. And that's my main interaction with Western.
Oh, that's
amazing.
incredible. Oh, I'm kind of jealous. Oh. So, I guess before we kind of dive into everything and get into spoilers and whatnot, do you want to give us a quick spoiler-free rundown of the movie, Maddie?
I can try. So,
I mean, you're going to do a better job than either of us.
I don't know about that. I just know the movie starts with us being introduced to Maddie and her telling us about her dead father, which is really sad. And we immediately are in this like moment where she's going into town to kind of find her father's body and bring him home. And she witnesses a hanging. She seems really immune to the idea of death, which is interesting as a 14-year-old girl. And she is looking for a man to avenge her father's death. And that's how she meets Rooster Cogburn, who's played by Jeff Bridges. And he's in a courtroom explaining how he had his interaction with these people he was looking, because he's a U.S. Marshal, so he's part of the law in a way. And they start this journey together, and many other things happen on the way, looking for the man who killed his father, who's called Tom Chaney.
Yeah, that's a pretty succinct synopsis and gets us right up to that spoiler barrier. So if nobody has anything else, I think we're good to cross that threshold.
Let's dive into the meat on this pie. I don't know why it's pie.
And much like with all of our other guest episodes, we're going to let Maddie take the reins on this one. Admittedly, it seems a little reluctantly, but in our pre-discussion, she definitely had some really cool ideas and some concepts that I think even we didn't really look at. And so, like, bring those to the forefront. Challenge us, Maddie. Tell us things that we did not see.
This is a lot of responsibility.
But you know what? I believe in you, and that's the important thing, right?
Okay, let's talk about people.
All right, let's talk about people.
Okay, so I think we should talk about Cogburn, Jeff Bridges, first.
Okay.
Because he's our character that we see the most growth from. He's arguably the most likable character in some ways.
Hard question mark on that one, I heard.
I like how the first time we meet him, he's literally like in an outhouse. Like the most vulnerable state of a human being. And like we see him at the very bottom, and he's very reluctant to work with Maddie. He thinks that she's a child. He's clearly a very drunk, sloppy, dirty man who's seen a lot of things in his life. Very flawed character. But by the end, he's saving her life, so I think his arc is very cool. Unlike going into Maddie's character, we don't see a lot of change from her, and I don't think that's a bad thing. I think establishing a very strong, independent woman who has a very set goal carries the whole movie very nicely. And then we have LaBeef, who is not
terrible
my favorite
name.
character. Yeah, I looked up how it was spelled. It's not how it looks, but he's played by Matt Damon, so it has an element of charm, as many people would associate with Matt Damon. But he also is very creepy.
Oh my god.
LaBeef is exceptionally creepy.
Fuck LaBeef, though.
And he's got a silly name, and that makes it easier to make fun of him. I know that's someone's real name, and I probably shouldn't say that, but like I just did, and I can't take it back.
Look, man, if your name is LaBeef and you're introduced, like, threatening to kiss a 14-year-old girl while she's asleep, I think at that point you deserve to be made fun of a little bit here, right?
I feel bad for all the non-LaBeefs that are being associated with Matt Damon LaBeef right now. But you are correct. That it's not a great introduction for a character.
So, like, we're just gonna never refer to LaBeef by a pronoun and just only call him LaBeef, though, right? Because we have not stopped calling LaBeef LaBeef.
I think that's what they intended, though.
Sorry, continue.
He's the butt of all the jokes in the movie after he's introduced. Like, he literally bites his tongue almost off, and then that's like an ongoing thing from then on. When he talks, he has like that slight lisp to his voice. So it's just like you're supposed to laugh at him, I guess, which is kind of weird.
Yeah, there's an uncomfortable dichotomy. Like, this is just something that I'm going to take a quick aside to really cover. Just in how he is presented in the beginning and how he kind of ends up at the end of, like, he was, very funny in a weird way, but like not so much himself, but like a situation around him that almost kind of makes him an enjoyable character. And so like to go from creepy to almost likable is a weird arc and really unearned.
Well, Sean, you challenged me to not include any anime in this, so I'm gonna include a comparison.
It's been 5 minutes. What is wrong with you?
You shouldn't have mentioned it, because now I thought of the perfect comparison. So the thing about LaBeef is that he's introduced
so sorry.
With a really creepy scene where he's introducing himself after watching Maddie wake up, and then says that he wanted to kiss her in her sleep, but he didn't even find her attractive, or it's really weird. It's a really creepy monologue. And then the next really major scene we get with him, like, she trails him and Rooster, and then he gets mad and says the child shouldn't come along, and starts like beating the shit out of her and like hitting her with a switch, and it's really extended and uncomfortable. But then like after that, the more like consistent, like the reason that we can laugh at him is that he's kind of like a Mr. Satan from Dragon Ball Z character.
God fucking damn it.
Yep. He's like a braggart. He's like, I'm a Texas Ranger. Like, I'm a fancy boy. And everyone, Rooster always makes fun of him and tends to like be like the wittier guy in the situation, and like he isn't presented as especially competent. Maddie, like you said, he gets hog tied. I mean, he not only does he bite his tongue off, his tongue gets bitten off as a consequence of being hog tied and dragged around a horse. Yeah, so it's funny because like what his actual flaws as a character are like completely not at all related to the creepy stuff he does at the beginning. It's weird.
Why are you who you are?
Well, I think that Jackson has a good point, that it goes back to the idea that all the characters in this film are neither completely good or completely bad. Like, even when we meet Ned Pepper, he has this element of, like, likability, and we're not really sure if he is, like, this horrible outlaw that we're supposed to dislike. We never really have any background on him. Even when they have kidnapped Maddie and he has her in his possession, he doesn't, treat her poorly. He like literally feeds her and like asks her about her life. So I don't know. That's why I think that LaBeef's character is important, in the sense that he seems to be on the good guy side, but he definitely has some really bad qualities about him. So that's my 2 cents.
It's a totally valid 2 cents. Like, the idea of every character kind of having this dichotomy works really well throughout the movie, and like it plays into what you were saying of like there's not like a right and wrong, or like the fate of the West, etc. I just, as I said, LaBeef is the one that just kind of sticks with me, because like he does, while he's not necessarily redeemed, he is the ways in which we view him are improved, and like I don't like condoning that, is what it boils down to. Like, it is almost entirely a personal thing, but it bothers me.
That's fair. I think it's wise that they had Matt Damon play him. Otherwise, I think no one would like him at the end.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of this definitely is due to the fact that Matt Damon is a charming asshole.
Yes. One of the most interesting scenes involving LaBeef to me that is also pretty funny was the little pissing contest between him and Rooster about who's the better shot. Like, when they start shooting the cornbread and throwing it in the air. It's really farcical, and I like how both characters, if we're talking about, like, the myth of the cowboy, even though, I'm not necessarily the most, up-to-date on, like, the canon of Westerns, like, we all have a general idea of what the archetype of the cowboy is, like, the strong, silent, like, masculine type, and I really like, the way this movie undercuts that, image in a lot of ways, by presenting, the Texas Ranger as this kind of buffoonish braggart, and then in this showdown between him and Rooster, who, is the, guy we're following, is played by Jeff Bridges, like, we tend to like him more, even if he also has some pretty, like, severe faults, but then they just get caught up in this total, like, bro, like, showdown of, I'm the, like, better shot, like, I'm the bigger man than you, and they keep having this, like, grandstanding, like, squabbling all throughout. And it's what causes them to... I mean, what causes them to split apart in the first place is an argument over their military service. Like, they're trying to constantly prove, like, who's the bigger badass, and in the end, they both end up looking really foolish. And I really like that, especially in the context of the ending, when, you know, to kind of finally tie it into death, you know, the subject of the podcast, as we always struggle to do. But I think that the way that we're told that Rooster dies is really interesting in this regard, because in the epilogue, we're kind of... Maddie only finds out that he's died from his fellow, like, troopers in like a touring, like, rodeo show, and he doesn't get the heroic cowboy death. He doesn't have the last stand, and, you know, in front of his nemesis as, like, he protects someone or whatever. He just went on tour with a circus, basically, and did some trick shooting, and then he died of natural causes, and he was like 90, and it's not really an epic death at all. It's kind of lame, given, like, what we see of him in the rest of the movie. And so I think that there's, in addition to what you're talking about, Maddie, with the Western from, like, the young girl's point of view, I think it's also kind of taking the piss out of the, like, big bad, like, stoic manly cowboy figure in a lot of ways. I think it's doing quite a bit to sort of, like, pull the rug out from under them.
Yeah, I think that's one of my favorite parts of how the movie actually ends, is that seeing that they both died alone and, like, very quietly. It's kind of a grounding experience that they were real people, I guess, and it, like, kind of brings them back into our reality, in the sense that Maddie is a 14-year-old girl going on this experience, and these guys are, like, working overtime to try to impress her. So it's like, it's this weird, like, surreal moment for the audience, in the sense that we don't understand why they're doing this, but it's because we're seeing everything through her eyes, and that she's still trying to figure out, like, her relationship with Cogburn, if she can trust LaBeef, and, like, how these men, besides being people that she's paying to help kill her father, how they fit into her life long term.
I mean, I guess from here, the big question is, do we want to jump to, because we've got, like, a nice segue to the ending. Do we want to talk about the ending really quick, or do we want to keep talking about, like, Maddie and death as a driving force?
Well, I'd like to talk about, because I think we should talk a little bit about Maddie first, as we move towards the ending, because I think the ways that, like, she interacts with death is really interesting, and, like, one of the reasons, so when I was a teenager and I first saw this when I was, like, 15, I found the movie very off-putting, and now, like, you know, I'll chalk up to this. I was 15. I'm sure that the fact that we had such a stone cold killer of, like, a 14-year-old girl protagonist, like, probably, like, made me uncomfortable at that age. So I'm sure that had something to do with it. But now coming back, Maddie's character is really, really cool and interesting. And I think there's a lot of complexity there. Because the way that she's introduced is that she is a lot like other sort of vengeful characters that we see. Like, it's her primary goal. Like, she's almost robotic in her dealings. Like, nothing's gonna stop her from finding this bastard Cheney.
Her opening scene with the horse guy is just so good.
Yeah, like that opening scene with the horse guy, when she's, like, bartering him and playing around with him. It's really great. And then, but it almost does feel like, it almost feels like she's a machine, almost. Like, we never see her, like, have an emotional moment until we get the scene where, like, she gets her father's gun and, like, just this small pack of things that he has. Like, that's where she finally, like, lets her grief show. And that, I think, that starting from that place of grief, I don't know. I think that the way that she manifests it is just super interesting, in that now that she has lost her father, like, no other kind of death rattles her. Like, she spends the night in the funeral home with the corpses, and like doesn't even bat an eye, doesn't like seek all like alternative lodgings. And then later on, when she is asked by Rooster to cut down the guy they stumble upon who's been hung, it's played like a comedy scene, because this movie is actually really funny because it was made by the Coen brothers. And so she's like climbing the tree, is like, like shit, this is just frustrating, and like has to hack away with the knife, and the body like crumbles, and like she doesn't even care. So I don't know. I think this is a super interesting place for a character to start. I'm assuming you guys have something to say on that.
Go ahead, Sean.
No, take it, please.
No, I haven't heard from you yet. Go ahead.
In general with her character, I honestly don't have a whole lot to add. Just because, like, from Jackson's perspective, I agree with him in a lot of ways. I have a slightly different read on the tree cutting scene, but it's neither really here nor there. It was humorous, but not in this. I got humor out of it, but not really in the same way. It still worked really well for her character. But like overall, like, I don't have a whole lot to add to what Jackson was saying. It's honestly what it boils down to. So,
I think Maddie as a character, well, obviously I relate to her as a woman, as myself, seeing her going through these motions, having a powerful woman type. I think it's interesting too to note that in the old movie that I grew up with, that the Maddie is portrayed in a very, like, almost boyish way, because she has a very short haircut, she carries herself very much like a guy, and it's like, even the way she dresses. So I think it was nice to see the Coen brothers going all out and letting Maddie be a full-blown woman and being herself and having this kind of power. I do think, so, we're going to forget talking about this, but the moment that we understand that Maddie is that she is this 14-year-old girl is the moment that she shoots Cheney and falls back into the pit. Because I think it's like this entire time we've seen this character who seems flawless. She's very strong. Like, she doesn't seem to be faltering in any way in her mission. Once she accomplishes this mission, she immediately has to respond to her actions by falling and literally getting bit by a snake and having to ask for help to get out, which we haven't seen her having to do that before. I know other people have opinions about the pit, so let's just get it out there.
So, the pit. I really like this movie. I need to preface it by saying that I liked everything about this movie leading up to this point. I thought it was really effective. I thought it was really engaging. I thought it was really entertaining. But if you are any listener of the podcast before, you are well aware that Jackson tends to handle bigger themes, and I tend to look closer at scene-to-scene issues and like what doesn't work quite as well. And this moment is the epitome of what doesn't work super well in a movie. There's just a number of flaws leading up to the moment that could be corrected fairly easily, but at least in the version that we see, are not. So as Maddie intoned, character Maddie falls into a pit. This is after she has been captured by the villain Lucky Ned and the dude she was chasing. His name is like Chansey. I always fucking Cheney.
Chansey.
So after she catches up to Dick Cheney, the Lucky Ned guy leaves to go fight with Rooster, and Dick Cheney is left with her, and so we have like the showdown for a hot second, and Dick Cheney gets knocked out by oh my god, there's too many character names. LaBeef. How could I forget LaBeef? Dick Cheney gets knocked out by LaBeef, and then Ned gets shot and killed by LaBeef after a showdown with Rooster. And then after that all happens, LaBeef gets conked over the head by Cheney, which, like, all of this is set up. Like, where all this gets established fairly easily. Like, it makes sense as a tension rising and falling. It's great. It makes sense that he would get up, all that good stuff. He wasn't dead. The pit, however, has next to zero establishing. The only mention of it before she falls into it is a casual, watch out for that pit there. Like, that's all that's said. LaBeef says this, it's a tell, it's not shown at all. So, like, when I hear this, I'm thinking, oh, it's like a throwaway line. Don't step in that pit, you'll break your ankle or something like that. Something small. Like, I'm thinking, like, maybe a 2-foot hole. Nothing big. So when she shoots LaBeef and gets launched back into this pit out of absolutely fucking nowhere, it is the most jarring, sudden thing to happen in this movie in general. Like, everything else is so well established and set up that for this 15-foot deep pit to just appear is so rough. It's so jarring to me. It just drags me out. Like, there's no real setup for it. There's no establishment of it. It just kind of appears and happens. And, like, they're going to get into the themes and how it works as a microcosm and all that good stuff. And they're 100% right. There is nothing wrong with what they're about to say. The scene works when she's actually in the pit. Getting into the pit, however, is just dumb. It just adds, like, a sudden extra layer of tension that is not set up. Like, you're used to the relief and then rebuild. At that point, all the tension should have been dissipated. All the bad guys are gone. And then all of a sudden, this pit comes out of nowhere and swallows her whole. And it's just, it's jarring, and I honest to God hate it. Like, it's not a good addition to the movie in the way that it's set up. As a thematic continuation, yes. If it was established better before, sure. As it is jarring and terrible. That's my feelings on the pit.
Oh my goodness.
I told you I would go off on it.
Maddie, your rebuttal.
So I actually like that she falls literally down under the ground after she kills Tom Cheney, because up until this point, our entire focus has been revenge. Killing Tom Cheney, killed her father. Like, they've been ground into our heads since literally the first scene. So, I think it's nice that it's jarring because it's so... She has never thought about the consequences of what happens after she kills a man. Because up to this point, we've seen, Cogburn, Ned, everybody has killed at least a few people in this movie, and she has witnessed it all, but she's never actually been behind the gun. So this is kind of like she's immediately, like I said, responding for her consequences for her actions. So this is the man that she's been finding all this time. She hasn't thought beyond this point. So it's kind of physically throwing her into a different part of the world, just so to speak.
You just gotta show us the pit, though, and it would make sense.
But I'm with Maddie on this one now. I do like that it's a sudden descent, like thinking of it in this light.
But just show us the pit and it still works. It's still a sudden descent, as opposed to just this thing that's just there. It's literally like a hellmouth that just opened out of nowhere. I am all for getting knocked into this pit. It makes sense in the context of the movie. I am not arguing this here. You guys are absolutely right. But as a setup, there is no build to it. It just happens.
I say that I'm pro pit, but I should stress that I have seen this movie twice now. The pit was one of the things I remembered. I do remember being similarly confused by the sudden appearance of the pit from when I was going through my first viewing at 15. On my second viewing, it didn't bother me at all, though. So I guess there's that.
I think it literally is just a first viewing type of thing, and that's a whole nother discussion.
Well, it makes me also wonder if this movie was created with the idea in mind that many people who have seen it will have seen the old one. Because in the old movie, it's established 3 or 4 times by 2 different characters that the pit exists. Like, Tom Chaney says, like, hey, there's a pit over here. And Maddie's like, oh god, there's a pit. There's snakes in it. Okay. And then when LaBeef gets up there, she's like, hey, there's a pit over there. Don't fall. So, like, in that sense, I feel like maybe the Coen brothers were assuming people had already seen the movie. Sorry, Sean, but...
It's a weird assumption.
It's not that weird though, because this is like a pretty famous movie. That's like a pretty famous novel at that. Like, even if we hadn't personally like heard of it, I think maybe the target audience for the people seeing the movie, like, chances are would have been familiar with either the novel or the John Wayne version.
John Wayne
disagree, but like I think my argument for it comes full stop to, if you're doing a remake, you have to expect people to have not seen the original. That's the point of a remake. If you want to include homages and references and little nods to it, yeah, go ahead. But you can't just cut out all references to the pit, then suddenly have a pit. It doesn't work that way.
I do agree, but I think less so as, like, that makes it okay. I think that might be one of the reasons that it was made that way, you know? Like I think that's a logical explanation for why there wasn't as much setup.
It's not, though. That's the thing, is I think we're looking at this too... I honest to God, I think we're giving them too much leeway. The Coen brothers are great. I'm not going to argue that. Like, I'm not here to be like, the Coen brothers suck. No, they're great. They're great filmmakers. But, like, that's not how film works as a visual medium. You can't go into a film expecting the audience to have seen something previously. And to do so is a failing of the filmmaker in that moment. So if we are going to assume that the Coen brothers are good filmmakers, which they are, that is not going to be an assumption that they would have made.
This is getting into the whole, like, MCU, how much of a are you expected to know discussion again.
But even the MCU sets up so that you don't need to know anything. Like, everything in there, like, there might be, like, a little throwaway gag or something like that in the MCU, but, like, for the most part, you can pick up any one of those movies, barring maybe Infinity War, and get what's going on. Like, I can go watch Thor Ragnarok right now, having not seen anything else, and understand the context of everything else, because they explain it. That's the idea of visual medium, is that it's shown and told, so we know what's happening. This is briefly mentioned like it's a fucking rabbit hole.
All right. So, I'm not too invested.
I'm not mad, you're mad.
So I'm not too invested in the pit, because actually I do mostly agree with Sean. But while we're talking about visual storytelling, there were a few things I want to sort of, like, backtrack on a statement that I made earlier, and then also say something about the pit scene that I really like. So the thing I wanted to backtrack on is that, first of all, I think Maddie, you basically gave, like, 100% summary on why I think the pit works so well, but I want to add to it another scene that happened earlier that we haven't really touched on yet, where Rooster and Maddie run into the cabin where the 2 members of Ned's gang are, and they have a little encounter with them. And at first, you know, they're kind of prisoners. Like, Rooster's interrogating them, but they're it's not too, you know, he's not, like, trying to, like, torture or beat the information out of them or anything. But when the one guy who's hurt begins to crack, his partner tries to shut him up. He, like, cuts off his fingers and he stabs him, and you know, Rooster has to take care of the situation. And then Rooster makes a promise to this guy who's dying to tell his brother what happened to him and to make sure that he gets a decent burial. And this is the one part of the movie where it seems like these deaths might actually be affecting Maddie to some extent, because then when they leave, she kind of turns around and asks Rooster, like, weren't we going to give him a proper burial? And he's like, no, we ain't got time for that. So then, like, as they're going off, like, she still, like, looks back at the bodies one more time. And it's the first time we see that it has any sort of impact on her. And I think that this really goes along with what you were saying, Maddie, about, like, the blurring the line between black and white, kind of the shades of gray and all the characters, because this seems to be the moment where the first hint of doubt, where Righteous Crusader, Maddie Ross, is maybe seeing that the people that she's chasing are still indeed people. And then, she just had, like you said, she just hasn't had to been on the other side of the gun. And then when she finally is and descends into the pit, I really like that it's a snake. Some people might think that it's corny, that this is kind of the visual metaphor, but I really like that she gets bit by a snake, and, like, she literally has that venom in her, that, like, immediately after killing, like, this is like a poison. And then in the very end, even though, like, she survives, there's still that, physical scar because they had to remove the arm. And I just think that's a really nice visual way to kind of reinforce that that kind of trope of, like, the before and after the successful revenge story. And I think it's really elegant and really effective without using too much dialogue, and still making that point about how, like, like you said, finally being on the other side of the gun, like, changes a person.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. And while you were talking about the snakes, like, am I just making this up? Or when the first time we see Cogburn, like, getting ready for bed on one of the evening shots, he, like, puts rope around his bed, and he said it's because of snakes. Like, he's afraid of snakes.
No, you're not making that up. That was something that, like, really perked my ears when I watched it this time, because I had the context of what was going to happen later. It was a nice bit of foreshadowing.
Yeah, so I wonder if it's, like, is that a sense that he's also afraid of, because, like, you said that the venom, in a way, is, like, representing that she has, like, this toxin in her after killing someone, and he is, like, physically trying to remove, like, that idea of snakes, of toxins from his body. Like, he wants to remove himself from death in the sense that he can kill people without having any emotion towards it.
I think that's a really great point, because then, even when he has this final showdown, it's sort of implied that he's got maybe like a personal vested interest. Or do they say it outright in Catching Ned? I don't remember. But at the end, when he's about to have his, like, grand cowboy show-off, he even tells Ned's men, like, all right now, like, we're gonna settle this one-on-one. Like, I don't want to have to kill you guys, so this ain't none of your business, so just go. And the fact that, like, we're never really told why he drinks so much, and that's such a common trope that whenever there's this, like, grizzled, older badass character, usually they're, like, some sort of alcoholic, and usually the explanation is that, like, they're trying to dull the pain of some sort of tragedy. And keeping in mind that the movie is exploring these Western tropes so much, I think that him warding off the snake with the rope, like you said, I think that, and, like, combined with his drinking habits, is, like, a really salient point there.
Anything to add, Sean?
But the pit, guys. The pit.
Oh, God damn it.
The pit, though. Guys, like, you guys are making really good, clever points, and you sound all smart and stuff, but the pit. I think you're missing the big picture here, the pit.
Well, it is a pretty big picture. It's you gotta be a pretty large
but
hole.
It's not, and that's the problem. Oh, okay. Let's talk about if we're already in the end zone, so to speak. Let's talk about the scene leading up to the resolution. The midnight ride back from the snake pit. And kind of, because I know Maddie and I kind of fall on the same side on this discussion, but Jackson likes it?
Well, I like one specific thing about it, let's say. There was one thing in this scene that really stuck out to me. I can thinking about it more, I can see why you guys don't like it, but why don't one of you explain that?
I am not a huge fan of that moment because, A, the camera shots and use of weird CG, if that's the word for it, doesn't make sense to me in the sense that it doesn't reflect on the rest of the movie and how it was made. But that being said, I think it's supposed to give us the illusion that Maddie's literally fighting off these like poison, the poison venom of the rattlesnake that's in her blood. So she's almost like hallucinating as Cogburn's taking her across time and space to save her life. I just thought that there's better ways they could have portrayed that didn't feel kind of elementary. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, that matches basically what my issue with it is. Like, the Midnight Ride is done across a CG or an intensely designed to look fake background as she starts to fall into delirium. And it makes a lot of sense as to why they did it, and it might have worked better in 2010. But watching it in 2018, it just comes across as kind of jarring and strange, and in a movie that is so grounded in, like, practical effects, to see something like this come out of the blue is very strange. Like, the only other time, like, I was thinking about this actually ahead of time, because in the duel between Rooster and Ned's boys, at one point a man is shot, and like everything that they use for blood is like actual blood packs. So like you see it appear on their shirt, and like it's timed well and everything. Except for one man who falls off his horse and smashes his head on a rock when he's going down, because they add a blood squib in post to where he hits the rock. And it was like, just that was very jarring for me. It was a small thing, so I was ready to move on and let it go, but I'm like, ooh, that was a strange bit of CG that doesn't exist anywhere else in the movie. And then sure enough, a couple minutes later, we're in full CG alternate reality thing going on mode. We're once again, much like The Pit. I understand why they did it, but it feels out of place in an otherwise very cogent movie.
So, here's my defense for this sequence's virtues. I'm not going to debate the point about the CG, because although it didn't really bother me. That's, just like a subjective thing. So, no use getting into that. What I think the merits this scene does have going for it is that I think it does a pretty good job for me of making the consequences, letting that venom like sink in, like feeling that delirium. But more than that, I like that one shot of Rooster riding with Maddie like over the sunset. Not because it's a great shot or that it's especially clever, but I think, we're talking about how this movie kind of examines the Western. I think that by putting that sort of classic Western style shot like across the sunset, but in the context of our main character sort of going into delirium, like poisoned, like having just finally fulfilled her mission and maybe not entirely sure how she should feel about that. Like she says that she still needs to chase Cheney. So even though, again, like they don't have to say it outright, but just with that one line, we know that even with the revenge, like there's still a part of her that isn't satisfied. And then the part that I really like about this sequence, though, is when the horse finally gives out. Like they've been pushing it, and she can't take it anymore. And the horse finally collapses, and Rooster gets off, and he's like, "Well, I know what has to be done," and he pulls out the gun, and Maddie is just like screaming at him, like begging him to not do it, but then he does it. And to me, what that little moment does for the scene is it has this feeling of like, I'm like it feels like almost through that action, Rooster is kind of subconsciously saying, like, hey, I know it's difficult, but like, them's the breaks. Like, this is the consequences of your mission. You're one of us now. Like, you can't go back after, pulling the trigger yourself. And, even though it's maybe not something the characters are like consciously feeling, that's sort of the vibe that I got from the construction of the scene. And, I don't know, I was just really into that moment. So, yeah. Shrugs.
Cool. No instant rebuttal. All right.
I don't know how would you rebuttal that? I feel like I have my 2 cents, and I agree to disagree.
That's a perfect rebuttal. That's all we're looking for. Fuck it. I'm just gonna use that. I don't care. I'm gonna cut that out, and I'm gonna use that. And you can't stop me.
Sean is the editor. He's the master of our fate. We've submitted our will to him.
I am terrified. Oh, no. I think that scene works for the purpose it needs to work for. I think it's weird, but also makes sense that he doesn't even make it all the way there before he just gives up and shoots the gun when he sees the general store. I feel like that's fitting for his character, though. Let's go on and talk about after, what was his last line? I'm too old and fat for this. And then it fades, and then all of a sudden she doesn't have an arm.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I really like that. Yeah, I don't know. I like that whole ending sequence. To me, I think it strikes just the somber tone. It's just enough epilogue to sort of get the idea. I like that. That it seems as though through this journey that like Maddie, even as an adult, like can't really connect with normal people. That like she really has been changed by this, and that even the connections that she did make throughout this journey, it's not like she keeps in touch with them. She doesn't know. She only goes to see Rooster like a few days before his death because she only found out that he was alive and still kicking when she saw an ad for like a traveling rodeo show, and then she has no idea what happened with LaBeef. So yeah, and then I think that her moving Rooster's grave, even though they like barely knew each other, I think that it's a nice little action for her to complete her arc as like acknowledging that even though like they knew each other for only a brief while, like for better or for worse, like the whole journey that he went on with her like changed her in a way that she finds important.
Did you guys catch the mirror shot as his coffin is loaded into the same way as her father's coffin?
Yes. I did happen to catch that.
Which is why I'm curious, see what you guys think. Do you think by the end of the movie that we're supposed to see Cogburn as a father figure of Maddie, or just like a mentor role?
Are those mutually exclusive?
I think they are, in the sense that her father is the driving force of this film, but we don't see him as a father figure. We're just implied that he has those characteristics. So does Cogburn have those same fatherly ways, or he's just someone that she looks up to but doesn't necessarily relate to on like a family aspect?
Ooh, that's a question.
I'm sorry. I have an opinion, but I'll let you guys think.
I want to say,
See, I feel like in the text of the movie, we're supposed to get the idea that she sees him as a father figure, just given the mirror shot.
Yes, I agree with that.
But as far as actual context goes, I mean, I don't know that I would necessarily get either of those things from it, to be perfectly frank. Because to me, it kind of seems more like a man that she respects, but also a man that helped get her life all real fucked up. So, like, I think it's more of an acceptance of who he is to her, but not necessarily as a father or a mentor, more just you had a big role in my life in the formative years. Because he doesn't really seem to have any huge impact on, like, I grew up to be a cowboy because of him, because it doesn't seem like she did. Or, like, she doesn't seem like she's rough either, so I don't know.
I do wonder if it kind of feels like through the film that she's looking for those characteristics in him and not getting them. And in the same sense, when my initial thought when I saw that she was alone and he died alone and she dies alone, that maybe there were characteristics in him that she was looking for in other people but never found, which is why she dies alone, I guess, in a sense. So it's almost like she was trying to find the good in him, and she found it at the end, but it wasn't enough to, like, keep them together.
I think that sounds... That definitely sounds right to me. Because I'm struggling with this a little bit, like, thinking about the, like, evidence what is actually expressed. Like, because there are definitely moments where you can tell that she's like sort of really like sincerely like asking questions about like how to like, oh, like, is this gonna help, like, how, like, are we on the right track, and like, you know, tries to propose ideas. And so there are moments of the film where she seeks his approval, but it feels like more dominantly her attitude towards him is this kind of exasperation. So it really goes back and forth. So I mean, I think I think that sounds absolutely right. I think she's looking for that father figure and trying to fill that hole, but Rooster can't. Hello, are we still here?
Yeah, we are. Sorry, I'm marinating on things.
Oh, okay.
Oh, I was like, did we lose everyone?
Yeah.
Well, while you're marinating, I have a second question.
Oh, lay it on us.
Has to do with this. Okay, so this movie begins with death and ends with death, and there's lots of it in between. While I think we agreed that it's not necessarily a theme, I think it's definitely a driving force in this film. How do you think death affects each character and why?
Oh my god, you're like a fucking teacher.
Okay, if we just isolate it to Maddie, that's a pretty straightforward answer. Is that
I actually had an answer for Labif because I think that's kind of interesting. Because for him, these deaths are not... They're just the job. Like, he doesn't really have a personal vested interest in what's going on in terms of finding, like, Cheney, aside from the fact that he keeps, like, bamboozling him and getting away, and, like, he looks incompetent at his job. So I think it's interesting that, like, all this death comes from, like, a strictly cold, like, professional view from him, contrasted with Maddie, who is, of course, very personally invested, and Rooster, I think, seems pretty personally invested at least in finding Ned. Like, that seems like something motivating his character. And with Rooster, it's interesting because we hear him in that montage where they're just kind of traveling. We hear him talk about his family, and it's interesting that, like, it's all like, you know, my ex-wife, my first wife, like, she left me and took my son. I was kind of shit to him, so it didn't matter. And he didn't give, like, some sob story that you might expect, like, oh, like, that dirty Ned, like, killed my family or whatever. So it seems like it's personal, but on, like, a different level. Whereas, like, Maddie, I think that death has started to, you know, I'm just really brushing up on this, and I know it's awkward, but I think I finally just gotta say it. I really get where Maddie's coming from in this movie, because I too have lost my father, and I think that when you're so close to that, the fact that it has come entirely to define her life, in that losing someone so important to her when she was so young, especially, I think that's one of the things that makes it hard for her to make connections. And then I think that shows in the end, where the fact that she's seen so much death, she's now caused death, didn't find what she was looking for in Rooster. All of that, I think, is what leads her to be, like, kind of this, what it seems like from what little we hear, like, kind of this lonely person who doesn't really let anyone in. Like, you know, she never married. It doesn't seem like she's got a lot of close connections. And, and so I think that the fact that she has had to deal with so much death now has sort of, when you have that interaction, like so frequently, it tends to maybe dull that person's view of like of how close you should let people in, you know? And I think that's ultimately like the hollow feeling, you know, that's the point of all these revenge stories, right? Is that no matter how sweet your vengeance is, it's never going to bring that person back. So, yeah, I don't know. I think that's like I think this whole movie is kind of about her grappling with grief, and the fact that she does it by being such like an interesting badass is what makes the movie so compelling.
I'm not even gonna try and follow that.
That was amazing. Props.
Oh, thanks.
Yeah, that was a really succinct idea on a thesis, and like really good. All I can do is yell about pits.
Well, shit. Sorry, guys.
Well, I think if I don't know if you guys have more to add about True Grit, but I had a decent way to wrap this up.
All yours. This is your baby here. So
take us home.
In the sense that Jackson talking about how having so much death in the movie and having Maddie interact with it so many times that she becomes almost like dull to the idea of it being painful. This movie begins in the sense that she's looking for someone who's already has that ideal, like, immune to the emotions of death, because she's looking for someone with true grit, and her definition of that is someone who kills without being like any thought of it. Because we are introduced to Jeff Bridges' character, and he's talking about how he doesn't take prisoners. He killed someone without them having any way to defend themselves. And it's interesting that with the whole story arc, at the end of the day, she becomes that person she was looking for. Ta-da!
Damn! I think you solved it. I think you solved True Grit.
Yeah, I'm gonna. This is like a great way to end it. So, props to Maddie on that one. That's a fucking solid thesis. God, you people
because of Jackson
saying the smarter things. God, I'm gonna go crawl in my pit. Oh.
God, the fucking pit. It's gonna haunt us all.
So yeah, we'll wrap it up here. I'm gonna let Maddie tell us a little bit about her stuff and what she's got going on and why you're part of the podcast this week.
Oh, so Beating a Dead Horse is an awesome sponsor of a nonprofit that I'm running called Art Your Way. We're an anti-bullying organization that works with high school students to make art about their experiences. We bring in local artists. We have workshops. It's really awesome. We actually just finished our recent workshop session, and we have a big gallery show this Sunday in Columbus, Ohio at Wild Goose Creative. If you're not in Columbus, like us on Facebook. You can see live updates. It's going to be amazing. So save the date. Thank you guys so much for letting me come on here. This has been a blast. It's exciting that you guys are doing this every week and sharing your knowledge with the world.
Is there any thing you want to promote for yourself? Any place that like people can find you online that you'd like to promote or anything like that? Or you're pretty all right without that?
If you look up artyourway.com, it has all my information on it.
As a quick aside in post, if you're looking for any of this information, all the contact information, websites, all that good stuff is in the description of the episode, so go check that out and, like them on Facebook and whatnot. Perfect. So if you want to get in touch with her or anything like that, that's a great way of doing that. Please, if you are in Columbus, come to the show. It's a great community, a great program, all that good stuff. And that was a much better explanation than when we tried to explain it in our Darkest Minds episode, because that was a nightmare.
Great.
So yeah, thanks to Maddie for coming with us through this journey and guiding us through some crazy stuff. Like this is probably deeper than we've gotten in a movie in a long time, because we've also.
So sorry.
No, we've been watching like Predator and stuff. We haven't had anything to talk about.
Honestly, I've missed talking about movies with some actual meat to them, with some actual depth, because that's just the problem when you want to be trendy and talk about all the newest movies, but you live in a small town with one theater that only has 8 screens. And I'm grateful that it at least has that many, so like I see movies, but then whenever there's like a bunch of releases one week, inevitably it's the prestige stuff that gets cut. Like it's always just gonna be blockbusters and those kind of action movies, which, I love blockbusters and action movies, but I want to talk about dramas too on the show sometime, and every time we plan it, it just falls through because of the town. So great.
So yeah, I guess with the usual stuff, I'm on Twitter at Sean_McKinda. You can find me there. You can find my website, isortof.com. Got a bunch of reviews and stuff up there. I haven't done a review in a while just because I've been busy with other things and still trying to figure out the most appropriate way for me to talk about movies and whatnot. So there's stuff coming with that soon. So I might be seeing some new projects. So keep your eyes on that site. Jackson?
I'm Jackson Keller, and you can find me over on Twitter at JacksonJKeller. It's been pretty dead for a while now, but that's mostly because I am planning my next move, my glorious rebirth. So look forward to that.
If you want to follow the podcast, you can at BADH_cast. That's a great place to know what's going on with the podcast, what's coming up next. As well as if you want to pitch us ideas for a movie that might be interesting to talk about. Or, I mean, heck, I guess if you want to try and guest, reach out to us. You can do that too. I make no promises that we'll have you, but you can try. We're always looking for new options. As
Sean just wants to sit on his throne, watch the masses come to him as he flicks them away.
Send me your tweets. Make me feel popular. As always, thanks to 25yearslatersite.com for hosting us. For once, this is an episode that I am proud to be on the website, and I think it's worth listening to. That's a joke. All our episodes are great, but this one actually has content, not just jokes about anime.
It does have those too, though, so it's the complete package.
And shout outs to Loads of the Highway for the use of our theme song. It's Suicide alternate take off the album High Octane, Low Expectations. Next week, it will be back to just Jackson and I, and we will be talking about, oh my god, fuck me, it's Alien vs. Predator week.
Not just Alien vs. Predator, but Alien vs. Predator and Alien vs. Predator Requiem as a birthday present to me. Hooray!
Oh my god. You know how we just said that we were so happy that we were talking about like movies with themes as death and occurs, and then we're talking to
But this is different because I'm nostalgic about it.
Fair. And this is also actually the beginning of our Spooktember month. I just made up that term, and I didn't because I stole it from every other person who's ever called it Spooktember ever. But we're going to be getting back into the spooky stuff. Both of us are taking our pick. This time it's Jackson to choose the nostalgia bait that's going to turn out terrible, and we already know it will, so I'm a little happy on that one.
I'm here for my defense of the original AVP until I watch it again, and then I'll have to concede that you're absolutely right.
So yeah, expect some more Halloween goodies. 2 of those are going to be actual like prominent releases, and then I've got a episode coming out on Halloween itself of some good stuff. So get ready for that. And any closing remarks, Maddie?
Just thank you guys for letting me be on here. It was really fun.
Yeah, thank you
very much for joining
great.
us.
So I guess until next week. Bye.